Now the Wedding Market Chat with your host, Julie Albaugh.
This is Julie Albaugh. I am editor and host of The Wedding Market, and today I am joined by Lisa Joyner, who is going to talk about the Midlife Bride. She's actually the author of Unveiled Wisdom, Wedding Planning for the Midlife Bride. So, Lisa, I know that, that the reason you actually created this book was because of your own experience. Can you kind of tell us a little bit of about your own experience in getting married and the midlife bride and all that?
Absolutely. It was actually a really wonderful experience overall, but as I made my way through the process, it just became so apparent that the wedding industry is focused on the young bride, and almost everything they do is for her. And that's fine, but there's a lot of us out there. There's 564,000 midlife brides every year in the US. So there's a lot of us, and we spend $15 billion on our weddings. So we have the money and are willing to spend it, but there aren't a lot of products or services. And so certain aspects of it were really frustrating. Finding a dress, finding a right size venue, and just getting people to respond positively to you. Mm-hmm. It was interesting that you get a lot of sideways glances and raised eyebrows over being a midlife bride, but you did.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was some of the experiences? Was it more about the bridal gown, or was it all types of different things?
Certainly the bridal gown was a key factor, but it was all different things. For a young bride, the wedding market, the wedding industry, and different vendors have a cookie cutter that they have a plan, and they want to put you in that plan. And midlife brides have a bit of a different plan. So, we come into this process with a different awareness of who we are and how we want to execute our wedding. We know who we are as individuals and who we are as a couple, and we want our ceremony to really reflect that. And so we're not going to go for the cookie cutter most of the time. We're going to take different elements of it, but we're going to redefine it. And it's hard getting people to get off that plan and kind of work with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you share with us some examples of maybe some cookie cutter services that were offered to you and how you wanted something different?
Okay. And we'll talk about the dress differently because there's a lot to talk about there.
Okay.
But with the cookie cutter plan, especially where the venue is concerned, there's a lot of things that they don't take into consideration because we are in midlife and older. Our parents are older, our friends are older. And so, when you go into a venue, first of all, most of these events are smaller events. They're more intimate gatherings. I'll say 75 or less, okay? And some are different. Some are obviously going to be bigger, but for the most part, they're smaller. So just finding a venue that will accommodate that is difficult. There's a lot of venues out there, but they're geared for a larger crowd of people. And then, when we're older, we're not as stable on our feet. We have some mobility issues, maybe our guests might have mobility or stability issues. And so it's finding something that has, an entrance and exit strategy where the ground is level. Our parents were both in their 80s and 90s, and one was in a walker, one had a cane. It was difficult. And so the cookie cutter thing is they want you to do it their way. Mm-hmm. And the midlife bride wants to do it her way.
Uh-huh. Well, it's so interesting that you talked about how finding, venues with, for guests 75 and under. And, it's funny, you're right, that the typical wedding ceremony is much bigger, usually for the other, markets of brides. Mm-hmm. But in my experience, I have found some wonderful venues that are probably in that range, probably 60, less. But the problem also is that some of them are not really marketing themselves as a wedding venue that are in that range, because they know the typical wedding size is much bigger. So they're marketing themselves as like rehearsal dinners and things like that. So that's a part of our issue when we're talking about the midlife bride. Also, is some of the venues that kind of go to that criteria are not marketing themselves as a wedding venue.
Oh, so you're absolutely right. A lot of midlife weddings happen in backyards or in restaurants because they can rent out the whole restaurant or a portion of the restaurant. So you'll see that's very common. You know, maybe a small vineyard or an outbuilding on a vineyard, but it's I'm in California, so that's pretty common here. But it is difficult, and it's just having this conversation and having people become more aware that there's a lot of us out there, and not just midlife brides. I'm sure that there's young brides that also want to have small weddings.
Well, I actually
so it's it's a market.
Well, I also think that, you know, even some of the destination weddings, I think cater better to the smaller weddings also. A lot of I think so.
They do. Yeah, you'll find a lot of midlife brides do destination weddings. Some of them, bring their whole family with them. And so, again, it might be a group of 60 people, but they all travel to a destination. Well, they spend a lot of money doing that, and they want to create a beautiful environment no matter where they are. So, again, it's not about spending the money. It's about finding, the right style of venue. We're not interested, for the most part, in having a garter toss and doing all that, or an orchestrated first dance. There's certain elements of it that we take out, but that doesn't mean that we don't put in something different that is more meaningful to us, that represents us. So
yeah, well, I tell you, one of the venues that I saw, that's actually, I'm from Ohio, but I think it was actually like a Frank Lloyd Wright venue. But it catered to something like, maybe 50 or less. But then they had like a place outside. But like I said, they just didn't, market themselves as a wedding venue, so to speak. So, but I mean, I know there's wonderful places out there, but really, I think we need to tell the venues that fit those criteria that there is a market out there for them. And that might help.
I agree. Yeah, that's what's great about having this conversation, is it maybe will let people know that, it doesn't mean that you have to choose one over the other, but to offer, both. I think that some of these venues do have other types of events at their locations, and they're just not thinking about having a wedding. When we got married at a golf course that had a lot of weddings there and a lot of events. And they had a beautiful ceremony site down kind of on a stream in a grassy area with an arbor and stuff. But they wanted us to have our event inside. They have a beautiful room inside, but it feels 300 people and stuff, and that's not what we wanted. So we opted to do it on their patio and just make it all happen outside. And in California at that time of year, it was the end of September, that worked. But getting them to think outside their room was difficult. I had to keep them on task. They kept wanting to pull me back inside and, go through their cookie cutter process. And it's just because they haven't done it before. There's no mean intent there. They're just not thinking about it. So it's interesting.
Well, I mean, every bride, I think, wants a customized experience for the most part. But I mean, they should, be more open to, listening to you and seeing what you want for your wedding and what you value. So
I think they're open to listening. I think that it makes them uncomfortable, though, and it's easier to do what they know than to try and do something a little bit different. And I agree with you. Every bride is special, and every bride should have exactly the type of ceremony that she wants. But for some, it's just easier to fit into the mold, if you will, the traditional things, and that's fine. There's some midlife brides that probably want to go through that, but the majority of them don't, that I find. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The dress was another issue that came up. There's mostly they are designed for young women. And they're strapless or sleeveless, especially when I was getting married, which was in 2011. Since that time, they've started adding a few designs with sleeves, but it remains really difficult. So, you've got to come up with some fixes for these gowns if you want to wear a traditional gown of any style. And there are some pretty easy ones to do, especially if it's strapless. You can do a jacket like a bolero jacket, or the kind they're like crop tops that slip over the head, and because they offer you sleeves and change the neckline and the back line, which is really what we're looking for. We've got our bodies are not what they once were, so we've got some back fat and side fat issues that you don't want captured by your photographer. They're going to capture it. I hope they take it somewhere else.
When you talked about your dress experience, it sounded like you had to make a lot of changes, alterations to your dress to get your type of dress that you wanted. Can you talk a little more about that and what you did? And
yeah, it's I did. Most of these gowns are heavy. They're beautiful, but they're heavy, and many of them are a fuller silhouette. And so, with a fuller skirt, lots of tulle and taffeta, etc. And that's fine, but mostly our body shapes don't look good in that. So finding a more slender style is difficult, but it can be done. And then what I did is I cut off the train, because the train is heavy and it's a lot of fabric that you're carrying along with you. Again, if we're not as stable on our feet, or if the person who's escorting us down the aisle, like my dad was in his mid 80s, and he was pretty unstable. It was all I could do to hold him up and get him going. He was fine. He was just very emotional. Or if you have a grandchild that's escorting you down the aisle, you don't want them tripping on the train or the dress. So I cut off the train and lifted up the hemline, and that gave me a lot easier mobility in that dress and made me feel a lot more confident wearing it too. So those are definitely options that I recommend to most midlife brides to do. That, and I didn't wear a veil. I tried a lot on, but that's a young girl thing. They're very ethereal, but I just kind of look silly.
I guess based on your dress experience, if you were to talk to the bridal shops as a whole, what would you tell them about your experience and how they can improve?
Well, first off, when you walk in the door, they ask you if you're the mother of the bride, and that kind of sets the tone. And then when you tell them that you're the bride, they feel that there's a couple things that happen. They either do an eye roll and you get treated kind of poorly, or they feel bad, and so it's just, don't assume that because we're middle-aged that we're the mother of the bride. And you can offer us a variety of dresses. They immediately want to steer you towards the mother of the bride dress in ivory, or a bridesmaid's dress in ivory. And for some that might work, but for the most part, we want to try on bridal gowns. That's why we're there. They're not offering samples in big enough sizes so that we can get our bodies in them. And that's not saying that we're huge, but I was a size 10, and some of those little gowns, I just couldn't even get on to see how they were going to look. And that's embarrassing. So maybe a variety of sizes would be nice. And then silhouettes that offer sleeves, or at least a sleeve option. Make sure that you tell the bride when she comes in that if there isn't a sleeve or a neckline that she likes, that they can order fabric, because all the designers offer fabric. And you really have to know that to ask it, because the majority of them don't tell you. And maybe some styles that are altered, either a picture of them having been altered, or purchase one and bring it in and let us see what it looks like before and after, from a strapless to something with a higher neckline and some sleeves. So those are some quick recommendations. And you know, we know who we are and what feels good on us, but you know, give us a little bit of time, and don't rush us, don't push us. I had some very distressing times in the dressing room and stuff, just in stores in general. And I'm not the only one. I had a couple of friends that were also midlife brides, and you know, one of them went home in tears and never went back. Another one decided not to go back. Instead, she hired a seamstress to make her a gown. And so that's not, you know, that's not what you want. You want to welcome every bride and offer her a good experience. Mirrors in the dressing room, inside the dressing room, would also be great, so we don't have to come out. We're a little bit shy, you know.
No, I mean, it sounds like, you know, we talked about the venue and we talked about bridal gowns. Was there other areas that you felt that didn't cater to the midlife bride?
Those are the two primary areas. And, you know, those are pretty significant. You know, the cakes and the caterers and that sort of thing, they were pretty willing to do whatever we wanted. You know, again, it depends on the caterer, the event venue, and if they have their own catering, you know, having that sized down to fit your wedding party size. But for the most part, those are the two main things. But those are pretty key. You know, but there was also no book out there. There were no magazine articles. There was no website. And there's still, other than mine, and there's one or two other books that have come out since 2011. But really nothing that is discussing this woman and her issues. You know, some of us are divorced, others are widows or widowers, and some of those issues. The complicated finances of combining, you know, two older people together, moving, you know, combining two households, and both of you have a lot of stuff, and so nobody talks about those things, and you know, that's a shame because they're real and we do go through those issues.
I think it's after going through your book, I could see that there was a lot of things, helpful information in there, whether it be for maybe a bride to get good advice as far as preparing for the wedding, and not just the wedding, but the marriage, you know.
Yeah, thank you.
And
yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. People ask me a lot how I was able to maintain the voice. People that know me that have read the book say they could hear me talking, and how I was able to do that. And I really just envisioned a woman and I was talking to her. So that's kind of how I kept the voice going. But after I got married, I finished writing the book and everything shifted for me. So it was very different. I had to really go and like reread some chapters and get back into that mindset in order to sit down and finish the book with the same voice. But, you know, after I was married and I started going through some of the other challenges, it gave those last few chapters, I think, were pretty meaty. You know, there's some good information in there. It was challenging. I got married at the end of September. I really didn't move in with my husband until April of the following year. It was just, you know, having been alone for so long, having two households, I worked out of my home. That was hard for me to make that move. I mean, I wanted to be with him and that wasn't the question, but giving up what was my house and my stuff and moving into another location, that was tough. That was tough. And I know I'm not the only one that goes through that. So some people choose to move to an entirely new city or buy a house together. And that's probably easier, but still difficult. Still difficult.
Yeah.
We're a little bit more set in
Well,
our
a lot
ways,
of times a midlife bride, you know, because you have children involved, that, and you're combining two households, and there might be children with the future husband as well as the bride getting married. That's, I think that's is challenging also, because you have to kind of make sure that there's a good fit for all of the children involved. And
yeah, you do. It's it's a combining and a blending, but it's not the Brady Bunch. Mm-hmm. It's rarely the Brady Bunch. There are those that decide not to mm-hmm. combine and to try to keep those separately. And, that's fine. That I think the biggest thing is to have good communication and know what's going to work for each mm-hmm. part of each family, and where they can combine them together and make that work, that's great. And where they can't, mm-hmm. they have to own that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's you're not going to get it 100% perfect, and knowing that is mm-hmm. okay.
Yeah. But, reading your book, one of the things that, I was a wedding videographer. I'm still a wedding videographer. And I noticed that what you put in there was about picking a wedding videographer. Now, what did you do to find your wedding videographer in your process of planning your wedding?
We did not have one. We did not have one. And I regret that. I think it would have been nice to have that. It wasn't high on our list, and so I think it just kind of fell off the list. We did have a photographer, and I was very happy with the choice of my photographer, but it took me a while to find one. I actually hadn't written a section about finding a videographer until I interviewed some other midlife brides, and that became very important. So I did the research to put that in the book. And I think it turned out well. You've got to be simpatico with them. They have to understand your style. They have to understand what you want. You have to talk the same language. You have to be realistic about what you're looking for in the outcomes. I think knowing whether or not you want sound or whether you want just video and music played, over the top of that or whatever. I mean, there's some really good things to think about and choices to make, but also someone that's going to capture the essence of your wedding and its style. And that takes time to look at a lot of film and look at a lot of pictures, whether it's a photographer or a videographer. You can't rush that process. We interviewed a lot of photographers, and it just, I think that one probably took 2.5 months before we really nailed one down. And we did a lot of research. So
yeah, well, it's when you talked about not getting video, believe it or not, the biggest regret from brides still to this day, and I've been in the industry, wedding video industry for 25 years, is not getting video. And one of the things, it is the last thing on the list. And I think a lot of times that's why a lot of times it gets cut. I've had the pleasure of working with brides who have passed it on to their children, and they tend to watch it more than anybody else. But it's amazing how that still is a regret. I'm.
Yeah, if I had to do it over, I would absolutely put video up near the top. For us, we wanted a cake, but spending a lot of money on the cake wasn't that important. I think you do need to go through and prioritize, and I think it's easier for midlife brides to do that. But I would highly recommend a video and a good photographer. I think you need both. And some of the other stuff you can let go. We had music, but we didn't spend a lot of money on the music. It was background music. For us, it wasn't important to have a big dance party. For others, it is. So, you have to really look at those things and say what's important to you and what's important to your partner. And you have to honor that. You can't just have it be all about me I needed to know it was important to my husband. Although most of the time he says it's whatever you want. But, I do think that there are some things that once the male finds his voice within the wedding, that's good, because you really do want it to authentically represent who you both are.
And I remember one of our conversations previously, and we were talking, a lot of times I think wedding pros think, okay, a midlife bride is not going to spend, X amount of dollars, but that really isn't true. It's just like you said, they prioritize, what it is that they want. And they're going to spend more money on certain things.
Yeah, midlife brides as a category in the U.S. every year spend $15 billion. So that's a lot of money. Most of them, so a midlife bride I categorize as 40 and over. And if you look at the numbers through the wedding report, most of them spend $25,000 to $50,000 on their weddings. The one age group that doesn't is between 60 and 62. And that's interesting, because that's like right at retirement age. And so you can tell that their priority is retirement. But the rest of them, once they get to 65 and over, it goes right back up again. So there's definitely a lot of money being spent, and that's without having specific products and services offered. So I can't imagine if if people got on this bandwagon a little bit and started really promoting venues and dresses and even the videos. If you think about it, how you do a video, a legacy video even, to offer to your kids and your grandkids, there's got to be a lot of money in that, and they would opt to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, now when did your book get first released? I know it's not been out too long, but
right. Well, I quietly released it in April, but we had the launch party for it in September. So yeah, and I'm excited. It's nice that the conversation is starting. People are starting to talk about midlife brides, and it's been getting some good publicity. So I'm very happy about that.
Now, where could they find the book if they wanted to purchase it?
It's available on Amazon.com. You can go there directly, or you can go to my website, unveiledwisdom.com, and click over from there. You can order it through any bookstore, because it's available through all the traditional channels. Yeah, so all the normal spots.
Yeah. Well, I think you have some great tips for brides, like you said, whether it be the wedding or even the marriage. You have a lot of tips in there to prepare for the wedding and the marriage. But I also think that for the wedding industry, I think it'll be important for them to view this video later on, how they can do better to, serve that midlife bride. So I hope that our wedding industry will take notice and will start to, there's so many different niches out there, and this is just another one that they could get on and make it a profitable venture.
Yeah, I agree. And I so appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, we are a strong niche. We represent 26% of all weddings. And so, it's a viable niche, and I think it's a growing niche, because we're an aging society, and we're getting married older the first time around too. The young marrieds are getting married at, I think it's 29 and 31 are their ages now. So by the time they're into their second marriages, they're already midlife. So.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us today. And as you mentioned, I have a copy of the book here, and you have it in the background, is The Unveiled Wisdom, Wedding Planning for the Midlife Bride by Lisa Joyner. And as you said, it is available on Amazon.com. But thank you so much for being on here. And for those that have been signing on, this is Julie Albaugh. I'm editor of Wedding Market News, and we are host of the Wedding Market Chat on Twitter every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern. So thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.